Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Good evening. Thank you all for tuning in to a very special edition of Radical History because we have tonight a current event to cover, or um, something more current, I suppose. I, of course, am talking about the 1776 report. One of the very last things that Donald Trump did before he left office was publish this commission, and I am just so very excited to talk about it. It came out a few weeks ago, and I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about it, but it just keeps on coming back up, and I just can't help myself. And in the interest of fairness and decency and commitment to being thorough in my investigation of history, I feel like I have to cover it. So I'll be talking about the 1776 project. Sorry, 1776 report. And it was also a commission before that, the 1776 commission. So I would not want anyone to be confused because even though this is very clearly a response to the 1619 project, it is the 1776 report. So um, I want you all to know that I suffered for you. I like someone who will go unnamed. I bore the burden of reading this. I sacrificed valuable brain cells reading this report. So I hope you appreciate this. I want to be abundantly clear as well that under no circumstances should you read this or look at it or ever think about it again after we are done here tonight. But I'm going to tell you what's in it, and hopefully it is interesting and entertaining to you. And I hope that we can all enjoy talking about this truly abysmal piece of history. I think it's going to be terrific. So let us begin. So what is the 1776 report? Well, the 1776 report is in its own words. Hold on, I have it here. In its own words, a commission to cultivate a better education among Americans on the principles and history of our nation in the hope that a rediscovery of those principles and the forms of constitutional government will lead to a more perfect union. So, sounds pretty innocuous, right? Pretty great. Who could argue with that? Well, I regret to inform you, friends, listeners, that this report is not as virtuous as it makes itself out to be. No, in fact, this report is and was pretty explicitly made as a response to the 1619 project. Now, those of you who are longtime listeners will remember that I have done a talk on the 1619 project, and you can go back and watch it on my YouTube channel. If you are curious about what's in it, I do go over it in that talk, but you can also just go read it. It's on the New York Times website, and I think it's available for everyone. There's also a podcast. It's good. It's interesting. It is controversial, and I talk about why it's controversial in at length, and I don't have time to go into it. Ultimately, it tries to hello, Poison You Skypher. You have stumbled upon a history talk. I hope that you are ready to hear about some history because that's where you are. Ultimately, the 1619 project was an attempt to sort of resituate or evaluate American history with slavery and especially Black Americans at the forefront. This is a pretty common thing. None of the history was very radical. It was all stuff that has been covered. None of it was even really untrue. There were a couple of things that were sort of inartfully said that were controversial, but ultimately the 1619 project is pretty like, it's good. It's unremarkable. It would not raise eyebrows in any history course, which, as it turns out, made a lot of people really angry. The idea that slavery was important and significant and represented a contradiction in American values was very, very offensive to a lot of mostly right-wing people. And a lot of ink was spilled trying to make it look bad. But the really, like, the big thing that happened was that good old, now ex-president Donald J. Trump put together a commission of very fine people to produce a counter report, I suppose, of the 1776 Commission. And the 1776 Commission, here he is, our big wet president, signing the paper to put forward the 1776 Commission. And there were a lot of people on it. It was headed by Larry Arnn, who is the president of the private Christian Hillsdale College in Michigan, friend of ex-Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, and ultimately not a great dude. I'm not a fan. He kind of sucks. A lot of these private Christian college guys are really, really awful. He's especially so. Also on the commission, interestingly enough, was Charlie Kirk, head of Turning Point USA and person with an unusually large head. Interestingly, and there's no reason why anybody should care about this, but it's funny to me, Charlie Kirk's name is not on the final list of names attached to the report. I don't know why. And I have a suspicion it's because he didn't do any work. And the reason why I suspect that is because this is the laziest thing I have ever read in my entire life. And I have read a lot of student essays. This was phoned in to an extremely large degree. One academic scholar took a look at the 1776 report and found that it was at least 26% plagiarized. It includes no citations, no sources whatsoever. None. I mean, actually, that's not true. It does include a word-for-word copy of the Declaration of Independence, I assume, to pad the length of this 45-page paper. Oh, I've got an echo? Hold on. How about now? Does that sound better? Can you all hear me? Okay. Thank you for the heads up. So anyway, let's talk about the report itself. Now that we're at this this stage. So, hold on. Let me take you to the top so we can talk about it. The 1776 report, the President's Advisory 1776 Commission. So this report is designed to do, among other things, like I said, sort of restate American history. And it is, among other things, incredibly, embarrassingly poorly written. Listen to this first paragraph. In the course of human events, there have always been those who deny or reject human freedom, but Americans will never falter in defending the fundamental truths of human liberty. Proclaimed on July 4th, 1776, we must always hold these truths. The report is full of these really embarrassing sort of like overstatements. It's truly awful. And the introduction, which we're going to go through very briefly, I'll come back to that, essentially covers the um, the Declaration and the Constitution, which are, according to the 1776 report, infallible, perfect documents from which all human flourishing descend. The facts of our founding are not partisan. They are a matter of history. Controversies about the meaning of the founding can begin to be resolved by looking at the facts of our nation's founding. Properly understood, these facts address the concerns and aspirations of Americans of all social classes, income levels, races and religions, regions and walks of life. As well, these facts provide necessary and wise cautions against unrealistic hopes and checks against pressing partisan claims or utopian agendas too hard or too far. So the one thing that I want you to take away from this is that this is really boring. This is a really, really boring document. Most of it is a rehash of what you would find in any like standard American textbook. It was 2 long sentences, I think. There's nothing new here. This is not in any way revolutionary or interesting. Oh, yes, great question. So this was actually removed from the website, but if you want to follow along, please feel free to open this up and take a look. Again, I will show you the relevant parts, but if you want to read it for yourself, it's there. The first part, the vast majority of sort of the first is just first, I think 10 or 15 pages is about the Declaration, and 10 pages before it gets interesting. Before there's anything even vaguely interesting. So 10 pages just discussing the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. There, like I said, there's nothing new here. This is exactly what you would see in American pageant or any other standard American history textbook. It contains absolutely no new ideas. I don't know why it needed to be said. Much of it is plagiarized directly from conservative reports. It's just or conservative websites. It's truly shocking that anybody put any effort into this. Oh, somebody asked if they got paid for it. I looked. I don't know. I have no idea. I hope they didn't. I cannot find any record of whether or not anybody was paid for this. I don't think they did. I think they did this out of the goodness of their hearts. But maybe they did. I have no idea. So this is where it gets fun. And when I say fun, I mean not really, but at least it says something that's like kind of tantalizing. And it includes a section called Challenges to the American Founding. Challenges to America's Principles. And you'll notice that the 5 challenges to America's principles are slavery, progressivism, fascism, communism, and then racism and identity politics. And this tickles me. I shouldn't have to tell you that putting progressivism in the same category as fascism and communism, as well as racism and identity politics, on the same level as communism and fascism, is truly astonishing. It blows my mind. But these are the things. These are the problems that are facing America. So, some of these are more interesting to talk about than others, so I'm going to talk briefly about each of these in turn. So first up is slavery. And this one's real funny for a number of reasons. So one of the things it says in this section is that the most common charge leveled against the founders, and hence against our country itself, is that they were hypocrites who didn't believe in their stated principles, and therefore the country they built rests on a lie. This charge is untrue and has done enormous damage, especially in recent years, with a devastating effect on our civic unity and social fabric. Many Americans labor under the illusion that slavery was somehow a uniquely American evil. So, this is not the criticism that most progressive or modern histories of the United States put forward, the writing is very bad. The writing is extremely bad. It is a valid criticism if this were true, but this is actually not what most histories say. They present the founders and the founding as extremely complicated and as being fraught with a lot of different political and economic and social interests, and that there is a complication, but it does not inherently corrupt the American, social fabric. Even the 1619 Project is meant to sort of resituate the American founding in a way that includes more people, not to, criticize America as being inherently flawed, which it is. Anyway, it also is not true that American history textbooks or Americans believe that slavery was a uniquely American evil. And if that were true, it wouldn't matter because American slavery is unique in many ways. But that's neither here nor there. It's just, never mind. Later it says, indeed, the movement to abolish slavery that first began in the United States led the way in bringing about the end of legal slavery. This is not true. This is not true at all. Slavery was abolished in the First French Republic. It did not stick. It was abolished well before anywhere else in Haiti. Good question. So American slavery is unique in a lot of ways because it was chattel slavery. In that the children of slaves were also slaves. This is not unique exclusively to America, but it persisted here in a way that it didn't in a lot of other colonies because of the sort of caste system that we produced. In a lot of other places, new slaves were required to be brought in rather than being able to reproduce like they were in the United States. It's not entirely unique, but the sort of like chattel caste system in the United States is something that exists in the United States, in somewhat less so in Brazil, in certain French and Spanish and British colonies. But to compare American slavery to something like African slavery as it existed before, or pre-modern slavery or Irish slavery is a rhetorical trick that conservatives use a lot to make it seem like American slavery wasn't especially cruel, and it is. That's another lecture, though. When talking about the Civil War, this section mentions that the conflict was resolved, but at the cost of more than 600,000 lives. Constitutional amendments were passed to abolish slavery, grant equal protection under the law, and guarantee the right to vote regardless of race. Yet the damage done by the denial of core American principles and by the attempted substitution of a theory of group rights in their place, remember that term, group rights, proved widespread and long-lasting. These, indeed, are the direct ancestors of some of the destructive theories that today divide our people and tear at the fabric of our country. So the problem, according to the writers of the 1776 report, is that slavery treats groups of people as important rather than individuals. And the 1776 report places the origin of group rights as a concept with slaveholders, specifically with John C. Calhoun, the senator from South Carolina, who was a racist, but like an out and unabashed racist in a way that other Southern gentlemen were unwilling to do or unwilling to be. Now, this is hilarious for a lot of reasons, but it's especially hilarious because next, the 1776 report ties John C. Calhoun to progressivism. And this is truly the wildest thing. This is where it really diverts from history in some really exciting ways. Yes, I know. In the decades that, so this next section goes into this by saying, in the decades that followed the Civil War, in response to the Industrial Revolution and the expansion of urban society, many American elites adopted a series of ideas to address these changes called progressivism. Although not of one piece, and not without its practical merits, the political thought of progressivism held that the times had moved far beyond the founding era, and that contemporary society was too complex any longer to be governed by principles formulated in the 18th century. Yes, Radical Mar, that is exactly right. So, to jump ahead a bit, the entire complaint of the 1776 project or report with slavery is that John C. Calhoun perceived black people, slaves, as a group distinct from white people, and that was, a significant way of organizing society. And in the same way, people who believe in identity politics, or that racism isn't finished, or that we should somehow be kind to poor people, are also engaging in group rights. And therefore, they are part of the same intellectual tradition. That's right. Everything that departs from what the 1776 Project's perceived understanding of the Declaration of Independence, radical individual rights, is progressivism. Therefore, John C. Calhoun is a progressive. Woodrow Wilson is progressive. Roosevelt is a progressive. Woke libs are a progressive. Progressives. It's truly this is the most astonishing part of the whole thing. It is a definition of progressivism that is mind-bogglingly hard to understand. But if your brain is poisoned by Ayn Rand, then maybe this makes sense. A key part of this is the understanding of relativism. In the report, it says, progressives held that truths were not permanent, but only relative to their time. And this is really good. Pay attention to this. In order to keep up these changes, government would be run more and more by credentialed managers who would direct society through rules and regulations that mold to the currents of the time. A deep state, perhaps? Anyway. The next challenge to America is, of course, fascism. And there's actually not much in here that's all that interesting, but there's a couple things. One is this bit about Mussolini. Like the progressives, Mussolini sought to centralize power under the management of so-called experts. I'm sorry. I'm really having trouble getting through this. Okay, sorry. All power, corporate and political, would be exercised by the state and directed toward the same goal. Individual rights and freedoms would hold no purchase under fascism. I've talked about fascism a couple of times, and I actually really want to do another talk on fascism as an ideology in general. That's not what fascism is. This is not like an accurate understanding of Mussolini or fascism or anything. This it's dumb. I don't know. I can't tell if this is laziness or they just didn't do any reading. Or like the ideology that underlies the 1776 report really doesn't allow it to engage seriously with fascism because they're fascists. I don't know. What one or the above? Anyway, that part was funny. The next is the next is communism. Honestly, I mean, I wish I could find something interesting to say about this. This is so boring. There's nothing interesting in here. This is just sort of like a repeat of, there's literally nothing interesting in here. Communism, bad. Marxists wanted to conquer the world. There's nothing interesting here. It's not even exciting. But the next part is really exciting. And it's about racism and identity politics. And what they have to say about these things is truly exceptional. This is out of this world. So bear with me. The civil rights movement culminated in the 1960s with the passage of three major legislative reforms affecting segregation, voting, and housing rights. It presented itself and was understood by the American people as consistent with the principles of the founding. It seemed, finally, that America's nearly two-century effort to realize fully the principles of the Declaration had reached a culmination. That's it, everybody. Racism solved. Except, according to the 1776 report, it went bad. The civil rights movement, however, was almost immediately turned to programs that ran counter to the lofty ideals of the founders. Today, far from a regime of equal natural rights for equal citizens enforced by the equal application of law, we have moved toward a system of explicit group privilege that, in the name of social justice, demands equal results and explicitly sorts citizens into protected classes based on race and other demographic categories. In case you were curious about which of the 5 threats to America the authors of this report consider to be the most threatening, consider that there is an entire appendix on identity politics, almost as long as the introduction, that goes into great detail about the intellectual origins of identity politics as they see them, and also what's wrong with them. This is absolute just conservative fantasia. This is just maddening. It's a glimpse into the abyss. It is truly astonishing where this stuff comes from. So you'll remember that, well, identity politics as they are commonly understood are bad. The idea behind identity politics that, or certain ideas of identity politics that racism exists and is bad is fine. When the 1776 project or report talks about identity politics, what they mean is acknowledging the existence of racism. And so this is part of the problem with the term identity politics. But anyway, listen to how they understand identity politics. John C. Calhoun is perhaps the leading forerunner of identity politics. Rejecting America's common political identity that follows from the Declaration's principles, he argued that the American polity was not an actual community at all, but was reducible only to diverse majority and minority groups. Calhoun saw these groups as more or less permanent, slowly evolving products of their race and particular historical circumstances. Like modern-day proponents of identity politics, Calhoun believed that achieving unity through rational deliberation and political compromise was impossible. Majority groups would only use the political process to oppress minority groups. In Calhoun's America, respect for each group demanded that each hold a veto over the actions of the wider community. But Calhoun also argued that some groups must outrank others in the majoritarian decision-making process. In Calhoun's America, one minority group, Southern slaveholders, could veto any attempt by the majority group, Northern states, to restrict or abolish the enslavement of another group. In the context of American history, the original form of identity politics was used to defend slavery. As American history teaches, dividing citizens into identity groups, especially for this purpose, is bad. The original form of identity politics was used to defend slavery. Sorry, I cut off my own sentence there. According to the authors of the 1776 report. Now, regardless of how you feel about identity politics and how it has been used, perhaps appropriated by some bad actors in the present day, this is not what that is. Suggesting that John C. Calhoun, mega racist, was a fan of identity politics is truly bonkers. The 1776 report is trying to tie actual racists to people who simply want to acknowledge that racism exists. I could go into greater detail about why this is dumb and wrong, but I think that it speaks for itself. Um, okay, we're in the home stretch, folks. So the entire purpose of this is, so I forgot to mention this with the 1619 project, but one of the goals of the 1619 project was to provide some potential curriculum or help for teachers who wanted to teach more about slavery, and ultimately they provided a little bit of detail there, a little bit of a curricula for them to follow. It was not required by anybody, but the 1776 report is intended to counter that, to provide a its own curriculum to that you can use to protect American values, I guess. And so the final section is called the Task of National Renewal, which doesn't sound fascist at all. And here are some bits from the section on the task of national renewal. All the good things that we see around us, from the physical infrastructure to our high standards of living to our exceptional freedoms, are direct results of America's unity, stability, and justice, all of which, in turn, rest on the bedrock of our founding principles. Yet today, our country is in danger of throwing this inheritance away. The choice before us now is clear. Will we choose the truths of the Declaration, or will we fall prey to the false theories that have led too many nations to tyranny? It is our mission, all of us, to restore our national unity by rekindling a brave and honest love of our country, and by raising new generations of citizens who not only know the self-evident truths of our founding, but act worthy of them. Among the virtues to be cultivated in the American Republic, the founders knew that a free people must have a knowledge of the principles and practices of liberty and an appreciation of their origins and challenges. While this country has its imperfections, just like any other country, in the annals of history, the United States has achieved the greatest degree of personal freedom, security, and prosperity for the greatest proportion of its own people and for others around the world. These results are the good fruit of the ideas the founding generation expressed as true for all people at all times and places. An authentic civics education will help rebuild our common bonds, our mutual friendship, and our civic devotion. But we cannot love what we do not know. So, in conclusion, America is a more perfect union already. To suggest otherwise is divisive and progressive, but in the bad way. And that to talk about race, racism, or the intersection of various identities is, in fact, doing a racism in the same way that John C. Calhoun did. I could talk all day about what's wrong with this report. First and foremost, there are no historians on the council that produced this. Not a single one. They're all political scientists or administrators. It is in fact, I don't know. I don't know where this came from. It has no sources. It has no citations. At one point, it cites just a progressive historian, but has no footnotes. It also states sort of unequivocally that the Declaration and the Constitution are perfect, that they are infallible documents, and that you can find out what they intended and what the founders intended from primary source documents. But the founders were a diverse bunch in terms of ideology, if not in terms of not being white men. And you can read in their letters and in their correspondence that they had a diverse set of views, and that a lot of them, good old TJ himself among them, did not believe that the Constitution was perfect and should stay unchanged forever. That's why they wrote in the ability to amend it. And even if you believe that the Declaration and the Constitution are perfect, again, they have been changed multiple times. A lot of people point to the three amendments passed of the Civil War as the second founding, as important, if not more so, than the original document. And I believe that's true. Not that the 1776 report has anything to say. There is one mention of Reconstruction in the report. Here's the thing, is that the 1776 report, in addition to being just lazy regurgitation of what is already taught in the vast majority of American history courses. Look, I grew up in Oklahoma and Texas, and this mirrors exactly what I was taught in school and learned from people around me. Nothing here was new. I did not. This is exactly what people already learn. So I don't know why this was necessary. Two, if you wanted to make a case that America is great, or that we should perform some sort of national renewal, maybe make America great again, there are ways to approach that. There is a conservative intellectual framework to approaching this topic. It sucks and it's wrong, and this is not it. This is just lazy in ways that I'm honestly just kind of shocked by. It seems completely phoned in. It's hard to talk about because it doesn't really make any sense. It's completely incoherent. It has no sources. It is not clear exactly what it's talking about or responding to. Just on a very basic level, including identity politics in the 5 challenges to American, the American founding is just mind-boggling. Good question, Poison. No, I don't know that it has been adopted, and honestly, after I'm done talking about it, I would be shocked if anybody ever talks about it again. That being said, this sort of baseline curriculum is what they teach you if you're homeschooled. And this is what they teach you if you go to sort of a private Christian college. And this is what I learned being partially homeschooled and going to some Christian study groups when I was a kid. So a small number of already extremely right-wing people will continue to learn what is taught in the 1776 report. It will not be adopted by anybody who is not already using this, which doesn't, neither good nor bad, The other thing is that, and this is the really frustrating thing to me, is that they think you're an idiot, right? They think you're dumb. They think the people who wrote this report, and sort of just conservatives in general, and people who get upset when we talk about slavery or racism, they think you're too stupid to hold contradictory ideas in your head. They think you're too dumb to hear that the founders were inconsistent about some things, that some of them owned slaves, and that rather than this somehow being perfectly acceptable because they built into the Constitution the end of slavery, that they were imperfect men, that you can't handle that you're too dumb and too ignorant, and that the common folk can't be told the truth or anything even resembling the truth about American history, or else they'll stop believing in the American project. My opinions on nations in general, and this one specifically, are pretty complex. But regardless, it is entirely possible to know with absolute certainty that Thomas Jefferson owned slaves and raped his slaves and had children with them, and that many of the founders owned slaves, and yet there is still value in the American founding. There's still something useful or interesting or unique about the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. This is not actually all that complicated. It is, in fact, pretty easy. Many other nations, many other groups deal with this without any problem whatsoever. And that's what's so frustrating to me mostly about this, but about the pearl clutching after the 1619 project. Again, like I said, I don't believe this necessarily. I am pretty critical of the entire idea of national identity, but you can very easily be a patriot and love America and also understand that this country was built by slaves. Many people do. Many people of color do. James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, Martin Luther King Jr. all talked about this extensively. They all loved their country, and they understood with incredible clarity that it was a cruel, unjust, segregated society. And that's probably the most frustrating thing about this is that they think that ordinary people are just too stupid or somehow can't handle this information. And I'm glad. I mean, here's the thing, folks. I already, it's been 3 weeks. I already don't think about Trump that much. A lot of things have happened. Game stonk. There was an uprising. Coronavirus vaccine. I stand by my position that nobody is going to remember much about murder hornets. Thank you. Remember a whole lot about the last 4 years, because ultimately it didn't matter that much. It felt like it mattered a ton because we were constantly being bombarded by just one dumb thing or another. But this is just another flailing failed attempt to sort of hold back change. And it's weak and it's ineffective and it's going to be forgotten. But I think that that's right. Technically no new wars. Hooray. God, low bar. Anyway, the point is that this is just, this is culture war bullshit. This is good point, Jay Biddy. People will remember the Supreme Court. Actually, that's true. Now I'm depressed. Anyway, this is culture war bullshit. It will not matter. It does not matter like a lot of the stuff that happened. It is an attempt to hold back changing opinion, changing values, greater understanding. We no longer have 3 news channels and people can just go online and look up history. And there's a lot of bad things about that. There's a QAnon Congress lady who thinks that Jews fired a laser to start forest fires in California. But there's some good things about that, which is you could just look up what happened and be like, whoa, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. That's weird. And whether or not it means the end of the American project, that people suddenly understand. Yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is something that the Jew laser thing, that's what she came up with. I don't remember. Rothschild space laser? I don't remember. The point is that I also don't think the 1619 project is going to have a huge impact. It was significant because it appeared in the New York Times, and it made a lot of important people angry. But ultimately, it's not going to make a huge difference until we fundamentally change the way that we teach history. And there's a big section in the 1776 project about teaching history and about a new civics education. It doesn't really have anything in it. It's just stop telling kids about racism. But the truth is, and if, I have not been involved with actual history education in a while, but it's bad. It's very, very bad. Our history education in America is incredibly poor. It is low priority. And it's, it ends most of the time with World War II. Students learn very little about history as it actually exists, as it is applicable to present day. Well, I mean, this is a longer conversation, and I want to do a talk later or in February about sort of how to think about history. But one of the fundamentals that we miss is that, like so much in American education, students are being taught to the test. So it is sort of just a barrage of names and dates, and sort of very basic facts so that they can pass those tests. It doesn't teach you how to think critically. It doesn't teach you very much about how to think about history. It doesn't teach you how it's applicable to your life. You know, it doesn't tell you how to put things in context because of the historical events. It's just treated as something that is entirely abstract and dead. And this is no individual teacher's fault. You know, I have close friends who are history teachers, and they're doing a very good job. But fundamentally, the structure of American education in general, but especially American history education, does not value critical thinking. It does not value inquiry. It does not value really like any sort of critical approach to the facts. And this is because there's a perception that the history is just sort of like settled and done. But in academia, for all its failures, this has not been true for 70 years. And frankly, that appears to be the last time anybody involved with this report read a history book, was 70 years ago. And again, maybe if you think that everybody is too stupid to figure it out, you're worried that if they think critically about history, that, you know, bad things will happen. But it is entirely possible to have a critical view, to understand all the contradictions and bad things that America did, and still like America. If that's the goal, if that's important. You know, you might want to say that like truth or accuracy or, you know, real critical understanding of what happened is more important than whether or not you love America. But even if the most important thing to you is that citizens love America, it is entirely possible to teach real history. And yeah, no, Poison, that's a good point. You can't teach all of it. And there, you know, that's another problem, is that there's just not enough time for good history education. But you can do better. Like, we can do better. There is a way to teach history that covers, you know, not just like in my history class, like we talked about like the silver standard and like the 1830s, railroad bust and all kinds of stuff in extensive detail. You know, AP, I don't know if this is still the case, but like when I took AP Euro in high school, there was like 2 months that was just devoted to, Machiavelli's The Prince. Like, we can do better, you know? It's just not well used. And it may be hard. And the truth is that people may need, like, we may need to, I don't know, people probably are going to have to be required to do a little bit of ongoing education. You know, and a lot of people go online and somebody will tweet something or, you know, post a TikTok where they dance and talk about, you know, how Indonesian communists were murdered by, the CIA, which is true. But the point is that what we're teaching is incredibly outdated, and that it does not prepare people to understand what's happening in the present. And the 1776 report only reinforces that. Now, the reason why I'm especially mad about that, the what's happening in American education is just sort of a function of, decaying budget, institutional malaise, and, you know, a bunch of other issues. It's not any one person's fault. The problem with the 1776 project is that they sat down and they said, we can't have people learning this, they're too fucking stupid, rather than it just happening sort of like passively. So, that's my ramble about history. Please don't read this. Please forget that it ever existed. Make room in your mind for anything else. And, whether or not you think that America is a great nation, the greatest nation, a city on the hill, whether or not it's redeemable, whether or not it is good to group people by national identity, feel free to engage with what actually happened, because no person is perfect, no country is perfect, no group of people is perfect, and they don't have to be worth preserving or fighting for or believing in. You just have to sort of be able to hold contradictory ideas in your head and be okay with that. Sometimes things are complicated, and that's okay. So, with that in mind, thank you all for listening as usual. I'll be back next week, where I will be talking about stonks, among other things. And I do have a YouTube channel. It should be linked in my Twitch somewhere. Let me post it here just in case anybody doesn't have that. But yeah, I am finally learning how to do things. Possibly, maybe some video editing. I want to do some short talks just for YouTube. It depends on whether I have any time. But yeah, thanks everybody. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you all next week.